Medieval European millers, the hidden power behind bread. Imagine this. It's the year 1200. You're a poor farmer in a small European village. You've harvested your wheat after months of hard work. Your family's survival depends on this grain. But before you can bake even a single loaf of bread, you need to hand it over to one man, the miller. And everyone says he's a thief. Today, we're diving into the fascinating, scandalous, and often misunderstood world of the medieval miller, the man who controlled the bread of Europe, the machine that changed everything. In the Middle Ages, bread wasn't just food, it was life. Up to 80% of a person's calories came from bread. And to make bread, you needed flour. Lots of it. For centuries, people ground grain by hand using simple stones called querns. It was backbreaking work, often taking hours just to produce enough flour for a single day. But then, Europe got an upgrade. Watermills and later, windmills. Picture a river turning a massive wheel, powering giant millstones inside a dark, dusty building, or a wooden tower creaking as its sails catch the wind. These weren't just machines, they were game changers. They freed up time, boosted productivity, and, let's be real, made lords and monasteries very rich. And at the heart of it all stood the miller, the man who knew how to keep the stones grinding. The lord's monopoly. Now here's where things get tricky. In many villages, peasants weren't free to choose where they got their grain milled. Lords owned the mills, and peasants were legally bound to use them. This was called banal milling. That meant if you lived under a certain lord, you had to bring your grain to his mill, no matter how far away or expensive it was. You paid the lord a fee, sometimes in coin, but more often in kind, a slice of your flour. And who collected that slice? The miller. For villagers, the miller became the face of this system. He was the one who took your grain, measured it, and handed back less than you gave him. Was he cheating? Was he honest? Who could tell? This uncertainty is why millers earned such a bad reputation. The shady reputation of millers. If you flip through medieval stories, poems, or even sermons, one character keeps popping up: the greedy, cheating miller. In English literature, Chaucer's Miller's Tale gives us a bawdy, crude, and dishonest miller who tricks his customers. In French fabliaux, millers are mocked as gluttons and thieves. Even priests warned their congregations not to fall into the miller's sin, the sin of dishonesty. And honestly, villagers believed it. Imagine handing over your harvest, the very thing your family depends on, and suspecting the guy running the mill of skimming just a little extra each time. It fueled resentment. But here's the twist. Millers weren't all villains. Many were simply trying to survive, working long hours with complex machines that broke down constantly. The truth is, their profession was just easy to accuse, because no one could really see how much flour should come out of their grain. Life inside the mill. So what was daily life like for a medieval miller? It started early. At dawn, the miller inspected the water flow or the wind. Too fast, and the stones could crack. Too slow, and nothing would grind. He had to adjust the gears, the sluices, the sails, constantly tinkering. Inside, two massive stones spun against each other, chewing grain into flour. Keeping those stones sharp and properly dressed was exhausting. It required iron tools, precision, and sometimes all-nighters. The work was noisy, dusty, and dangerous, and it wasn't a one-man job. The miller's family often helped. His wife might measure grain, sweep flour, or bake bread to sell. Kids grew up in the mill, playing in clouds of dust, while learning the family trade. The mill itself was a community hub. Farmers came and went, waiting their turn, swapping gossip, maybe grumbling about the miller under their breath. Wealth without respect. Now here's where things get interesting. Millers weren't poor peasants. In fact, compared to most villagers, they often lived pretty well. They had steady access to food, some disposable income, and sometimes even literacy. Their houses near the mills were sturdier, and their families better off. But here's the catch. Wealth didn't equal respect. To most villagers, the miller was the middleman. the guys standing between their hard labor in the fields and the bread on their table. So while a miller might wear nicer clothes or eat meat more often, he was also the target of envy, suspicion, and mockery. He was part of the community, yet always a little outside it. Religion, symbolism, and suspicion. Religion added another layer. Grain and bread weren't just food, they were sacred, tied to the Eucharist. Handling them gave the miller's work a symbolic weight. But rather than being seen as holy, millers were often condemned for corrupting something so essential. Preachers used the miller as a moral lesson. Don't cheat your neighbor like the miller does. Stories turned them into comic villains. And yet, in Christian allegory, the mill itself became a powerful symbol. Grinding grain like God grinding down sin, or time grinding away human life. It was a profession wrapped in symbolism, suspicion, and contradiction. Conflict at the mill. Because mills were so profitable, they sparked plenty of conflict. Lords defended their monopoly fiercely. Villagers who tried to secretly grind grain at home with a cornstone risked fines, confiscation, or worse. Records from manorial courts show constant battles. Peasants sneaking in hand milling, lords cracking down, and millers caught in the middle. Some towns even formed millers' guilds to regulate the trade. But in the countryside, the miller remained a lonely figure, both powerful and vulnerable. More than just grain. By the 13th century, mills weren't just for grain anymore. Engineers realized the same water wheels and gears could do other jobs. Fulling cloth, sawing wood, even powering hammers in ironworks. In other words, mills were Europe's first big step toward mechanization. And the miller? He was one of the earliest machine operators in European history. Without him, the leap from hand labor to mechanical power might never have taken root so deeply. The legacy of the miller. So, who was the medieval miller? He was the man you depended on but never fully trusted. The one who lived slightly better than you, but carried the burden of everyone's suspicion. He was both technician and trickster, engineer and scapegoat. Without him, there was no bread. And without bread, there was no life. Next time you see an old windmill or a ruined watermill by a river, remember, these weren't just pretty relics. They were the beating heart of medieval communities. And behind the turning wheels was a figure both hated and needed, the medieval miller. So, was the miller a necessary hero of medieval progress, or the greedy villain of every peasant story? History, as usual, says a little of both.